I want to share a quote with you from Brendan Burchard. He said, procrastination is basically you choosing the alternative, you choosing the distraction as being more valuable to you than the payoff of actually finishing the commitment, the project, the book, the assignment, whatever it is. You value that relief, you value that distraction even more than the payoff of completion. Happy Wednesday, my winners and goal getters. How you doing? Welcome back to the Getting the Win Show. I'm your host, Mellissa T, the Procrastination Bully. And if this is your first time, welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in. Today is going to be a little bit different. I know I always say that, but today literally is different because in this case, I don't have a guest. But what we're going to talk about today is the procrastination cycle. This is, remember, I did promise you back in season one that when we get into season two, we're going to get down into the science of things, right? So the procrastination cycle, and you'll probably notice that you've gone through this cycle if you think back to the last time you procrastinated. So I wanted to shine a light on this. I wanted to break down the cycle into all of its steps so you can recognize when you're falling back into it and take the necessary countermeasures to come out of it. All right. I hope you got your pen and paper out. I always aim to impart value in every episode of the show and continue to take you on your journey to get your hashtag luxury item completed. And as always, be sure to like, share, subscribe, and follow all that fun stuff. If you find this episode valuable, be sure to share it with somebody, let them know, and we continue to keep the victory vibes going. All right. So just to give a brief overview of the cycle, I'm going to name the entire thing, and then I'm going to get into each individual step. So the procrastination cycle is roughly 5 steps, and I added a sixth. Okay. So it is tension, relief, guilt, back to tension, and then either anger or disappointment in yourself. And then that bonus one, that sixth one, decision. So starting at the first step, usually when we're procrastinating, it's because we've hit a snag and we suddenly no longer want to do the thing that we're working on. Whether that's something work related, a personal hobby, somehow, some way we hit a snag and we no longer want to do it. And now we're in a bit of a holding pattern because now whatever that project is isn't being worked on anymore. And you feel a bit of a tension in yourself because you're like, oh wait, like, okay, like I know I have to finish this thing, whether I want to or not. So there's that tug of war that you're experiencing. The next step is relief because you've chosen to put it off now. So now you're focusing on whatever that other thing is that you've chosen to now do, whether that's turning on your favorite show, your favorite live stream, cutting on something on YouTube, eating in some cases. For some of us, we've had the experience where we stress eat or comfort eat. You're looking at somebody that used to do that. Like, I've since broken the habit, thank the Lord. But sometimes that's a form of procrastination. Sometimes the relief comes in the form of extra research that may not be necessary anymore. You know what I mean? You may be the type that likes to analyze and get the backup information on top of the backup information for the previous backup information. Feel free to put that if that's you in the comments. Feel free to put that if that's you. No problem. This is a safe space. It can be taking a nap. It might be a situation where it's something where you've had to make a lot of decisions. You've encountered decision fatigue. That is a thing. Decision fatigue is a thing. And in many ways, that decision fatigue or mental fatigue is more strongly felt in our bodies than physical fatigue because you're using more of your brain's energy. So you might choose to take a nap. Or if for whatever reason you suddenly just don't feel that great, you just choose to take a nap. That relief can be you simply walking away from your desk. If you're working in an office environment, maybe it's you having a conversation with a coworker, even though you still have that task waiting for you when you get back to your desk. If you're working from home, it might be you stepping away from your workspace to, if you have a kid, maybe spend some time with your kid or maybe going for a walk, like in the middle of your thing. And then you feel the relief because you're no longer working on the thing that you didn't feel like working on. But then, as I mentioned, in the back of your mind, you still know you have that thing to work on. So that's step 3, which is guilt. So now you're feeling guilty for not having finished the thing yet. Like the task is still waiting on you. So you feel kind of guilty for putting it off, which then brings you back around to the tension. Like, okay, I know I have to do this thing no matter what. This report is due in less than 24 hours. I'm playing video games and I'm like streaming on Twitch because this stuff is fun. But there's still that tension that you still got to get the thing done. It's still looming over you. You still have to finish it. So now you're feeling the anger at yourself or the disappointment in yourself that you still haven't finished it yet. Now, notice everything that I've named so far. Notice the one thing that is in common with all of this. All of these things are emotional. One of the things you've heard me say in several episodes is that procrastination is not about time management. It's emotion management. It's emotional management. Having emotional intelligence is paramount in overcoming procrastination, especially if you're a recovering procrastinator like I am, where procrastination for you is habitual. This is all about emotional management and having emotional intelligence. If you guys saw my interview with Lisa A. Smith, who is a plant-based health coach, she talked about that, the importance of having emotional intelligence and how important it is in beating procrastination. If you haven't watched that episode, go back and watch that. That's going to be a game changer for you. But then remember that bonus step now. First, I left off at anger and disappointment in yourself because you're like, okay, fine. I got to do this thing. Fine. Like I'm going to, you know, I'm getting back to it. I don't want to do it. I'm mad at myself because now I have even less time to get it done in, right? And that bonus step that I added there at the end is the decision. So now you're feeling the anger and disappointment in yourself. You can either decide what I just named in the example to finish it with even less time than you had before, or you might choose to change your mind. If it's something that is minor, if it's something that you're not necessarily obligated to, you may choose to change your mind and cancel yourself out of it altogether, or just let it fall by the wayside and take no action and let the thing just die on the vine. Either way, though, it's a decision you've made. And you've likely heard me say this, whether in my workshops or in one of my other episodes. But when you make a decision, it's different than making a choice. When you make a choice, you're just picking between the options that are in front of you. When you make a decision, though, you're cutting yourself off from all of the other options. Whatever you decide to do, you're cutting off and killing all of the other options. So if you decide to finish it, that's your decision, and you're cutting yourself off from any option to cancel it or let it die by the wayside. If you go in the other direction and you decide to not take any further action, it'll die. It'll die on the vine. It'll just fall away. Or if you make the decision to cancel out, you call somebody, you committed to something, you call somebody and let them know, like, hey, you know what? On second thought, no, I'm not going, like, I'm not going to do this. Like, count me out. It's a decision though. And that's part of the procrastination cycle, which then leads back to tension, which is step 1, because now you have a lesser view of yourself. And that's the dangerous thing about procrastination, especially if you're a recovering procrastinator and it's something that you struggle with habitually. Because your decision, regardless of which of those 3 choices I named, it gives you a lesser view of yourself. Because now you're like, dang, I'm not very good at keeping my word. I'm not very good at keeping the promises I've made to myself. And that's literally the definition of self-confidence. You've likely heard me say that before. Shout out to Ed Milet. Self-confidence is simply the discipline of keeping the promises you make to yourself. So when you make that decision, whether to finish the thing in a rush with less time than you had in the first place, that makes you kind of frustrated because you're like, dang, I didn't have to sabotage myself like this, but here I am. If you decide to cancel, that's you breaking a promise to somebody else, or you ghosting the commitment and just letting it die on the vine, just letting it fall by the wayside. It's the same feeling. So then you're now back in tension. You're back at the start of the cycle. Because yes, there's a relief that you feel once you've made the decision, whichever one of those three. You still feel a relief because now the thing is no longer in your hair, whether it's short like mine or if you have a lot of hair on your head. That thing is no longer in your hair, but it still alters your perspective of yourself. And here's the other thing that isn't always discussed in the procrastination conversation. But in the event that you finish the thing, you make the decision to finish it, if you're honest with yourself, how proud are you of the caliber of the work you did to finish it? Did you put in your best effort to finish it in that tighter window? Be 100% honest with yourself about that part. And I'm speaking from experience. Like that's one of the things I always promise you guys in any episode. Like I'm someone who has waited till the last minute to do something. And there have been projects that I've worked on and I finished it. And by the grace of God, the the recipient was satisfied with the work. But there were times when I knew that despite their satisfaction, I didn't put my 100% into it because I had to finish it in such a rush. You follow what I'm saying? And if that's you, by all means, put that in the comments too. Like, again, safe space. This is a judgment free zone. So I wanted to take you through the procrastination cycle. So just to run it back, tension, that's the start of it. Relief, when you decide to put the thing off to go do whatever other thing you want to do, whether that's eating, sleeping, reading something, watching something, going for a walk, whatever it is you choose, reading a book, whatever you choose to do instead of finishing. Then you feel a guilt as you're partaking of the distraction. That's that third step, guilt. Then the tension, you're back to tension because you know you still have the task to finish. Then the next step is anger at yourself or disappointment in yourself. And then the bonus step I added is your final decision. You either decide to finally finish the thing in that much shorter time window, or you decide to cancel. You decide to change your mind. You decide to either cancel yourself out or just ghost it altogether. Like just take no action, which is still a decision, which loops you all the way back around to tension. Okay. So here are some ways to kind of counter counteract this cycle if you find yourself in it. But before I go into the counter strategy, I want to share a quote with you from Brendan Burchard. He said, procrastination is basically you choosing the alternative, you choosing the distraction as being more valuable to you than the payoff of actually finishing the commitment, the project, the book, the assignment, whatever it is. You value that relief, you value that distraction even more than the payoff of completion. I thought that was pretty powerful. I thought that was pretty powerful. And he's a great resource, by the way, in terms of productivity as well. But here's some things to consider. Some of these things you've likely heard before, especially if you follow the show. Or, if you're someone who is a recovering procrastinator and you're taking action to overcome it, I'm likely not the only source of information for you, which is good. Like, you want to make sure to vet your sources. But here's some countermeasures. One of the things I talked about in one of the earliest episodes, I want to say episode 5 when I talked about the procrastination styles, or episode 4 when I talked about prioritization and tools to help you prioritize your tasks more efficiently. Here's a way to counter that tension. Know what your triggers are. That's number 1. Be fully aware of what your triggers are. So this is something you would take the time to do on your off time. Even if that's something that you carve out 5 minutes for, you can carve out 5 minutes. I know like most of us are quite busy, especially in these United States, like we super busy. However, you can carve out about 5 minutes to take a quick inventory. And if you're not in a position to carve out 5 minutes, that already is a red flag to you that you're gonna have to rearrange your schedule and revisit episode 4 to learn how to prioritize all of the things on your to-do list. So revisit episode 4 if that's something you need help with. But take inventory of your triggers. That way when you encounter the tension, you can know why. You can understand why you're feeling this. Know what your triggers are. That's number 1. And then number 2, know your narrative. Know your narrative. That is a very fancy way of saying understand the excuses you tend to make when you procrastinate. We all have an ongoing narrative in our minds, right? There are certain things that we have fed our subconscious mind for years on end, especially if you're a recovering procrastinator and this is a habitual thing for you. There are certain things that you have fed your mind subconsciously for years now. So, and remember, your subconscious mind controls 95% of what you do. Not only physiologically, it controls your body's functions, but it also drives your decision making 95% of the time. So know your narrative. What are the excuses you tend to make when you procrastinate? Or what are the excuses you tend to make when you hit a snag in a project? For example, if you're, I like to use writing examples only because I'm one, right? So if it's a writing situation, maybe this is a topic that I've been hired to edit on that maybe I'm not familiar with. Say I use that as the snag and my excuse is, well, hashtag imposter syndrome. Like, I don't know enough about this. Like, what if I mess this up? That's an excuse. Or as I put it fancily in the beginning, the narrative. So if I'm familiar with that, if I know ahead of time that that's one of my narratives, then I need to stop what I'm doing and research the topic, whatever that is that I'm editing that I'm not familiar with, or if I'm in my copywriting vein and I'm having to write a landing page, a sales page, having to write someone's web page concerning a topic I'm not familiar with, it's time to look it up. Dia Sims, who is the CEO of Combs Enterprises, we already know what's going on over there, but she shared a wonderful quote that her mom instilled in her when she was growing up. Her mom said, "What does not knowing have to do with finding out?" Okay? So take that with you too. If you suffer with imposter syndrome, or if the thing you're working on is something you're not familiar with, what does not knowing have to do with finding out? It's easy enough to find out. Now, this is slightly different from what I talked about earlier with the backup research on top of the backup on top of the backup. If that's your narrative, know that. If you know that that's something you're habitually doing as a way of putting things off, write that down. Like, take inventory of that and know that and hold yourself accountable to it. Like, okay, I'm researching this for the 40th time. Why? You know what I mean? Like, take note of that as well, because that can also be a red flag for you. But know your triggers and know your narrative. What is the excuse about this that you feed yourself? Here's another example. Say, for instance, this isn't even project related. This might be social. This might be something social. Say, for instance, you're someone who is single, perhaps you're in your 40s, and you might be procrastinating on finding that partner due to societal or cultural standards, especially if you're in the US. Culture here, like US culture, focuses on youth. Like the younger you are, the more advantageous things are for you, right? And in social circles, especially as it relates to romantic relationships, the narrative is the older you are, the less desirable you are. And the US isn't the only place where this is prevalent. Like there are cultures in Asia that are like that. There are cultures in other parts of the world that are like that. But like the older you get, the less desirable you are. The older you get and you're not married, there's that question like, okay, what is wrong with you? Like, why aren't you married yet? Or why haven't you reproduced yet? Or something like that, right? That might be the narrative in terms of step two. Your excuse might be, well, I'm not really looking for anybody right now because one, supposedly there's a lot of pee in the dating pool. I've heard that so many times at this point. There's a lot of pee in the dating pool. And two, no one's going to want me because I'm in my 40s and they might wonder what's wrong with me or they might see me as damaged goods. Technically speaking, that is an excuse. And you have to be 100% honest with yourself about that because there are plenty of people that are in similar scenarios as you. Sometimes they're single because unfortunately their previous relationship didn't work, especially if they were previously married. And maybe a situation where that previous marriage unfortunately didn't work out and now they're available. Or if you're someone who is in your 40s and single by choice, there are other people who are in their 40s and single by choice. So that's a narrative. You have to know that that's your narrative. Be 100% honest with yourself. Know that that is your excuse and then take the necessary action. Like make a commitment to yourself. Using this dating example, make the commitment to yourself to attend at least one social event per week. It's a start. That number can be higher per week, but make a committed decision. Designate a committed action and write it down. You see that journal right here? It says write the vision on it. It's in cursive. Shout out to Jessica Holly. That is her write the vision journal. But write the vision down. Okay? When you're feeling that tension, know what your triggers are, or take the inventory before you get into that tension, but know what your triggers are, know your narrative, what the familiar excuses that you tend to use, or the familiar story that you keep telling yourself, and then dispel that narrative with a committed action, with a decision to move in the opposite direction. So if it's something you're doing for work and the trigger for you is that this is an additional thing that they gave you on top of all the other stuff you already had to do today, that's a trigger for you because you really can't stand, maybe you're someone who doesn't like surprises. So you immediately don't want to do it because now you're defiant. You're like, you know what? I have all this other stuff that you already asked me to do. Like, did you really need to put this on my plate right now? So that can be a trigger. So that's number one, know your trigger. Number two, know your narrative, which is either I'm the only one who can do this because I'm the best at it, or two, like your narrative might be, you know what? They just gonna have to, I'm not doing this right now because I don't want to. They just added this to my plate and I did not need this additional thing right now. That might be your narrative. That might be your excuse. It might be sort of subconscious rebellion for you. And then the committed action that you can do to counter that is to communicate with either one of your peers or with whoever it was that assigned the thing to you, and be like, listen, I understand that this is something you want me to complete, but here, just as a reminder, here is everything else that I'm expected to complete today. If you want this to get completed, you may not want to leave this in my hands. You may have to ask, like, can you please ask someone else on the team to do it? Or if you are the person that's the specialist, that is the only one that can do it, then just let the person know, like, hey, you're asking me to do this, but how high of a priority is this additional thing? Because there are all these other things that you've entrusted to me for the day. Like, how high of a priority is this thing compared to these other things that you've entrusted me to do? Does it need to get done today? Because if so, something else is going to not get finished. Because remember, guys, you are a hashtag luxury item. Do not make the mistake I made. For 9 years, I overworked myself to the point of burnout. And by the way, bookmark that word, burnout. I will discuss that in an upcoming episode in detail, okay? It is a whole thing with a lot of consequences attached to it. But that committed action could be, that decision could be communicating, advocating for yourself. In that particular example, advocating for yourself. Not enough people do that on a job. And the truth is, your leadership may think you're okay. Like, if you're not letting them know that you're overworked, they might think you're all right because you're just doing the thing, right? So the key is to be heard. Like, speak up, communicate respectfully, but speak up and ask questions that get their attention. Like, oh, wait, okay, that will help them think. One source for that kind of thing, to have those needed conversations, is Chris Voss's book, Never Split the Difference. If you haven't read that yet or listened to the audiobook, by all means, dig into that when you have the time. That book is a game changer in communication. Game changer. I'll put the link in the description so you can jump straight to it. Fire is a fire book. So know your triggers, know your narrative, aka the story you've been telling yourself that might be an excuse. Instead, be 100% honest with yourself and make a committed decision. Like, make a commitment in the opposite direction. Make a commitment in the opposite direction. And one of those committed actions, and I love how Mel Robbins puts this, she's like, use the 2-minute rule. Like, start working on the thing for just 2 minutes. Not even 5, 2. Start with 2. And then commit to another 2 minutes. And commit to another 2 minutes. And if you work at it long enough, you'll start to get back into a flow with the thing. Because at first you felt that tension and you wanted to stop. But if you commit to 2 minutes and keep going and keep going and keep going, you'll find yourself continuing to work at it. Erwin McManus was one of the most brilliant minds in business, entrepreneurship, and actually even in ministry. I've recently learned that he was a pastor of Mosaic, which is a church. I didn't even know that. Shout out to him. I mentioned him because he quoted something in a recent interview that he did with Tim Ross, where he was going through a health challenge with his eyes, where he had to like tape it up a certain way because he had gotten some surgery done on the eye. And he looked himself in the mirror as he was having to tape it up because he had to do interviews that day. You want to talk about tension. He had to do interviews that day. And he told himself while he looked in the mirror, and I think this quote will be a blessing to you too. He told himself, you know what? This is actually good for me, because doing hard things expands my mind. Like, my mind expands and gets stronger when I do hard things. Talk about powerful self-talk. So if that's a tool that you can use to kind of change the narrative in your mind, Use that too. When you come across that tension in step one and you really don't feel like doing the thing now, tell yourself that, you know what? I'm gonna commit. I'm gonna commit to doing 2 more minutes of this. 2 minutes. Because my mind will expand and get stronger every time I do hard things. And since I don't feel like doing this right now, this is a hard thing. I'm gonna give myself 2 minutes. You can't be getting stronger, right? You can't be having a stronger mind. So one more time, know your triggers, know your narrative or your story or your excuses. And three, make a decision, make a commitment in the opposite direction of what's tempting you to stop. Move in the opposite direction. And then number four, this is the last one as we wrap up. Ensure you have accountability, even if the accountability is only one other person. Even if the accountability is only one other person. Because if you're someone who struggles with habitual procrastination, this is going to be hard. This is going to be hard to hear. You may not want to hear this, but this is the truth. And this is something that I've come to learn as well in my journey. Procrastination is a form of addiction. Procrastination is a form of addiction. It doesn't necessarily show up in the same ways that other addictions show up. But procrastination is an addiction to avoidance, because that's all procrastination is. It's a method of avoidance. And habitual procrastinators, we became addicted to avoidance. Period. That's the honest truth of the matter. And the only way to break any addiction, regardless of its level of severity, is accountability. So even if it's only one other person, contact them when you come across that tension, or even if you're deeper into it and you're in the relief step and you find yourself giving into the distraction, the temptation to be distracted. Let that be your countermeasure. Contact your accountability person. Or if it's a group, even better, contact your accountability group. Whether you guys are communicating in Telegram, whether it's a Facebook group, an Instagram broadcast channel. There's some influencers that are now using broadcast channels on Instagram where you can directly DM the person. By whatever means the community exists, get in that community and say something. That way someone else can hold you accountable. And this is what I use. This is what I share in my workshops. This is what I share with the people that I coach. If this is something that you really don't feel like doing, like it is real hard to fight the temptation of that distraction, set a deadline for yourself, a timeline for how long you think it should take you to finish the thing, and report that to your accountability partner or accountability group. And then say, hey, this is what I'm working on. I really don't feel like doing it, but I'm giving myself X amount of time. I'll say 2 hours as an example. I'm giving myself 2 hours to finish this thing. Can you please ping me in 2 hours? Your mind works a lot differently when you know somebody else is about to hit you up about that thing versus when you're by yourself and you know that you just have this thing to do and you want to be distracted. It's different when you know you got somebody about to breathe down your neck in 2 hours saying, hey, where are you with that? Accountability is the cheat code to beating procrastination. Because as I mentioned, procrastination is a form of addiction. And the only way to break an addiction is with accountability. So I know that was a lot. Hopefully hopefully this information is helpful for you. If you have any questions, by all means, drop them in the comments. I'll be glad to answer them. And y'all know me, I'm an encyclopedia. So like I will point you to whatever resource I feel can be of assistance to you. Anything that I've found helpful, anything that I've learned from and grown from, I'm going to share it with you because I want to see you grow too. I want to see you win and get them goals. You feel me? You are a hashtag luxury item. Never forget that. Never forget that. And because this thing is attached to you, this thing has been entrusted to you and assigned to you, it is also a hashtag luxury item. So remember to get on that. Hashtag get on that. And now with this episode, I've given you some tools to help you get on that. And I'll drop all of them in the show notes as well, in the description. That way you can have all the references. You've likely seen the references come across your screen as I've been talking. But yeah, remember when you're watching this show, come with your pen and paper. So thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of the Getting the Win Show. Once again, I am your host, Mellissa T, the Procrastination Bully. And hey, I'm that person. I love you. I'm bullying procrastination. I will never bully you. I'm bullying the habit and the addiction of procrastination, because the world cannot and will not be a better place unless and until you finish what you committed yourself to doing. Keep those promises to yourself. Keep that commitment to yourself and to the people that are relying on you to finish. In the meantime and between time, drop any questions you have in the comments. Feel free to DM me on Instagram. You can follow me there at Getting the Win Show. You can follow me on Pinterest and Threads at that same handle, at Getting the Win Show. And of course, subscribe on the YouTube channel at Getting the Win. I'm your host, Mellissa T, the Procrastination Bully. Have a great rest of your Wednesday and a great rest of your week. Peace out. And be sure to check out the merch shop. If you are curious about the shirt, you want one for yourself, you can go to gettingthewingear.com. That way you see this shirt, you'll see a bunch of other accessories as well. We've got hoodies, we've got sweats, we've got all the gifts that you could possibly want to buy for yourself and for your folks to get the message out about being as productive as possible and staying true to yourself. Because the mission of this show is to turn procrastinators into producers. That's why I always task you guys to hashtag get on that and make sure you're on top of your luxury item. And that way you can rock the gear to remind the world that you are all about that luxury item. You are all about getting things done, getting the goals instead of simply setting them.